Between 2011 and 2021, the Cleveland Browns walked up to the podium for 16 first-round picks. That's 16 different chances to build a real foundation, but when you look at the names they actually called, their total return on those investments overwhelmingly were a disaster. No other franchise in modern NFL history has burned through that much draft capital and had so little to show for it. Today, we're going over what actually happened to each one of those draft picks. Phil Taylor arrived from Baylor in 2011 as a massive nose tackle prospect, standing at 6'3" and 320 pounds. He played with the kind of low pad level that makes life miserable for offensive linemen on running down, so the Browns took him 21st overall with the hope he would anchor their defensive front for a decade. The problem was that Taylor could never stay healthy. He missed significant time in half of his seasons in Cleveland and only managed to finish a full season his rookie year. By the end of 2014, he was completely out of the league. When a player can't stay healthy on the field, the talent level doesn't really matter, and that is the short version of the Phil Taylor story. The real damage really started in 2012 when the Browns traded up to 3rd overall and used it on Trent Richardson out of Alabama. At the time, the case for Richardson felt incredibly strong because he had 2 national championships and 21 touchdowns in his final college season. People in draft circles were even comparing him to Adrian Peterson. However, nobody paid attention to his yards per carry at Alabama, which was never actually that impressive, considering he played behind the best offensive line in the country. His vision in traffic was a major question mark for scouts who watched the tape closely. They saw a back who ran hard but constantly hit the wrong gap, and those bad habits got exposed the second he hit the NFL. Richardson only averaged 3.6 yards per carry in Cleveland, despite playing behind an offensive line that Pro Football Focus ranked 5th in the league. The Browns gave up and traded him to the Colts after only 17 games. He actually got worse in Indianapolis, and the pick Cleveland got in return eventually became Johnny Manziel, who we'll get to a little bit later, which somehow made the situation even more painful. The other half of that 2012 draft class was Brandon Weeden at 22nd overall. Weeden put up massive numbers at Oklahoma State with over 4,100 passing yards and 37 TDs in his final year, and his arm talent was definitely real. The red flag here was not subtle at all because Weeden was already 28 years old on draft day. He spent years playing minor league baseball before returning to college football, which meant his rookie season in the NFL was his age 28 season. No starting QBs are hitting their prime at that age, but Brandon was just trying to learn the pro game. He finished with a 5-15 record as a starter, and the team moved on within 2 years. 1 year later, the Browns used a 6th overall pick on Barkevious Mingo out of LSU. Mingo looked like the perfect modern pass rusher at 6'5" and 235 pounds because he was long and explosive. The games told a different story than his physical frame did, though. He played 3 seasons at LSU and only managed 15 sacks total, so the production was never actually there. Cleveland only got 7 sacks out of him over 3 seasons before they traded him away. He eventually had a decent career as a role player for other teams, but he was never the star you expect to get in the top 10. You had 2 different general managers cycle through the building during this time in Tom Heckert and Mike Lombardi. Neither had a coherent plan or consistent standards, and these picks just disappeared into a roster that was constantly being torn down and rebuilt from scratch. And with that being said, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor Kalshi for sponsoring today's video. Since we're talking about the Cleveland Browns, I had to check out what the market was for Cleveland to win 7 games at least during the 2026 season. Kalshi is the largest legal prediction market in the US with over 1 million users. Right now, you can trade on whether you think the Cleveland Browns will win at least 7 games in the 2026 season. The contract is sitting at 45 cents, meaning that the market thinks there's a 45% chance that this actually happens. If you trade at 45 cents and you're right, then you get $1 per contract. What's cool about Kalshi is that it's peer-to-peer trading, no sportsbook tilting odds against you or limiting your trades when you start winning. Plus, it's available in all 50 states, so if you want to try it out, Kalshi's giving away $20 to anybody who uses my link down below and also trades with $20. Thanks to Kalshi for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back into it. Heading into the 2014 draft class, the Cleveland Browns now had 2 picks again, this time at pick 8 and 22. This was an opportunity for them to add some talent on a team that desperately needed it. However, what they did is now a textbook example of what not to do in a quick way to ruin a franchise. The 8th pick was Justin Gilbert, an Oklahoma State cornerback who looked like he was built in a lab. He clocked a 4.37 40 at the combine and had the kind of length you want for press coverage, which helped him earn a unanimous All-American nod in 2013. In game, he looked like a future shutdown corner, but his draft concerns were there for anyone who cared to look. His own college coach, Van Malone, actually warned teams that Gilbert needed a very structured environment and constant direction to succeed. That's basically a polite way of saying the kid wouldn't work without someone breathing down his neck, and Cleveland took him anyway without providing that structure. The result was a total disaster, where Justin never earned a starting spot, nor the respect of his teammates, and played only 35 games in his entire career. The Browns eventually got so desperate to move on that they traded him to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 6th-round pick. When you trade a top 10 pick to your biggest division rival for pennies on the dollar, you're admitting that the player is completely worthless to your organization. Then we have the Johnny Manziel pick. This one is a bit more layered because the talent was actually there, and you saw it every single Saturday at Texas A&M. Back in 2012, Manziel went into Tuscaloosa as a freshman and beat Alabama, which is something that just doesn't happen to Nick Saban. He put up 92 rushing yards and 250 passing yards in a 29-24 upset that shook the college football world. He went on to become the first freshman to ever win the Heisman, and his sophomore year was even better with 4,100 passing yards and 37 TDs. The way he could create something out of nothing was unreal. If you were just looking at the tape, taking him in the first round made a lot of sense. The problem is that you just couldn't look at the games. Before the 2013 season even kicked off, Manziel had already been in a bar fight and tried to give the cops 2 different fake IDs. He got suspended for an NCAA violation involving paid autographs and even got kicked out of the Manning Passing Academy for showing up late and unprepared. One former NFL coach went on record before the draft to call him an arrogant little prick, so this wasn't just some secret rumor. Cleveland knew exactly who they were drafting in 22nd overall, and they did it anyway. What followed was a slow-motion train wreck that nobody could stop watching. Johnny got caught partying on video during the bye week, and then he looked his coaches in the eye and lied about it, even telling his friends to help him cover it up. He was spotted at a casino in Las Vegas the night before the final game of his 2nd season, which was pretty much the final straw. He finished his Browns career with a 2-6 record as a starter, and more interceptions and touchdowns before being released in March of 2016. Things got so bad that his own father told ESPN he was worried Johnny wouldn't live to see 24 if he didn't get help. Cleveland walked away from that first round with absolutely nothing to show for it. One pick ended up playing for their rival, and the other became one of the most famous draft busts of the decade. While the rest of the league was getting better, the Browns were just digging themselves into a deeper hole. After the 2014 Manziel disaster, you would think that the Cleveland front office would pivot into drafting some high-character guys, and they actually did, to their credit, but the results were still pretty much the same. They used the 12th pick on Danny Shelton, a 345-pound nose tackle from Washington who was a human brick wall. In college, he was a monster who ate up double teams and let his linebackers run free, which made him a highly valued interior defender. The only real concern was that he didn't provide any pass rush, which is fine for a nose tackle, but you usually want more than a run stuffer when you pick that high. Shelton did exactly what he did in college, which was play solid run defense for a few years without ever really standing out. He wasn't a bust by any means, but he definitely didn't play like a top 12 pick for the Browns. The part that really hurts is that after he left Cleveland, he went on to win 2 Super Bowls with the Patriots and the Chiefs. He proved to be a valuable piece on a championship roster, but the Browns just couldn't get that level of play out of him. Later in that same round, they took Cameron Irving at pick 19. He was an offensive lineman from Florida State who could supposedly play every position on the line, and that versatility was exactly why they liked him. He was a guy who was decent at everything but didn't really dominate at any one spot, and that became a massive issue in the NFL. Because he never had a permanent home on the line, he struggled with consistency and started racking up penalties at an alarming rate. Just like Shelton, he'd wind up in Kansas City, where he actually turned into a reliable starter at guard. It was another case of a player failing in Cleveland only to figure it out the second he put on a different jersey. By 2016, the Browns had fully handed the keys to Sashi Brown, who was obsessed with using analytics to hoard draft picks. The idea was to stockpile as much draft capital as possible to rebuild the roster from scratch, which sounds great on paper. The execution, however, was a different story. Their first round pick in 2016 was Corey Coleman, a wide receiver from Baylor who had just won the award for the best receiver in the country. Coleman was a human highlight reel who caught 22 touchdowns in his final college season and was easily the fastest deep threat in the draft. But there were signs that his success was a product of a gimmick offense since he only really ran 2 different routes at Baylor. Scouts also worried about his hands, and those fears came true almost immediately. Coleman broke his hand twice and struggled to stay on the field, finishing his Browns career with only 56 catches before being traded for a 7th round pick. The 2015 and 2016 classes weren't as loud as the 2014 disaster, but they were just as painful for the fans. Every time the Browns brought in a talented player, that player either hit a wall or waited until they left Cleveland to actually play well. The team was great at collecting picks, but they were terrible at actually turning those picks into a winning football team. After failing for so many years in a row, they finally got the number 1 overall pick in 2017, and they couldn't miss on this player. He was just too great and too obvious. Myles Garrett out of Texas A&M was a consensus top prospect in that class by a margin that doesn't come around very often. Standing at 6'4" and weighing 272 pounds, he moved like someone half his size off the line of scrimmage. Garrett racked up 32.5 sacks across 3 college seasons, but the production wasn't just a volume story, because the way he got there was even more impressive. He bent around tackles, converted speed to power on contact, and had the kind of burst out of his stance that offensive coordinators lose sleep over. There were no real character concerns, which was a first for Cleveland. The only genuine question mark entering his NFL career was whether the Cleveland organization would let him thrive or swallow him whole like they had done to so many before him. The answer, mercifully, was that Garrett was too good for the dysfunction to stop. He became an all-pro pass rusher and a cornerstone of the defense, serving as one of the constant presence on this roster across an entire decade of chaos. Eventually this past year, setting the single-season sack record. When everything else fell apart around him, Myles kept showing up and producing, and he's well on his way to Canton. The Browns also had the 19th and 25th picks that year. David Njoku at 19 was a Miami tight end whose combine numbers genuinely made scouts do a double take. He ran a 4.6 40-yard dash at 246 pounds and showed off an elite vertical, displaying the kind of athleticism that projects as a matchup nightmare at the next level. The concerns were that he was a raw blocker and still developing as a route runner, making him more of a projection than a finished product. In Cleveland, he settled into a role as a reliable contributor rather than a star, which is either a mild disappointment or a decent return on a late first-round selection, depending on where your expectations were set. He's still on the roster to this day. In a decade defined by players who flamed out or fled, sticking around for the long haul has to count for something. Jabril Peppers at 25 was one of the more fascinating evaluation puzzles in the draft. Michigan used him everywhere as a linebacker, safety, nickel corner, and returner, so his pure athleticism was beyond question. The issue scouts wrestled with was exactly what his role was going to be in the NFL. He wasn't a true safety, and he wasn't a box linebacker, and he definitely wasn't a corner. But Cleveland still got 2 solid seasons from him before he was packaged into the Odell Beckham Jr. trade and sent to New York, where he went on to have a respectable career. He was another player who worked out better somewhere else, though this move was at least a deliberate roster choice rather than a developmental failure. Then we get to 2018, and this is the year that really matters for understanding everything that came after. Baker Mayfield won the Heisman at Oklahoma by putting up 4,627 passing yards and 43 TDs, which gave him the highest passer rating in the country. He was accurate and competitive to the point it became combative, all while he possessed a feel for the game that you just can't manufacture in a prospect. Some teams didn't love the personality because he was cocky and planted flags on opponents' logos, along with being arrested. Plus, he was only 6'1" in a league that historically preferred taller quarterbacks. Still, the Browns took him first overall, and he delivered the thing that the franchise had been missing for a generation, which was actual relevance. He led the team to an 11-5 record in 2020 and a playoff win over Pittsburgh, giving the fan base a genuine reason to believe the cycle was finally broken. Denzel Ward in the same class at 4th overall was a near flawless evaluation. He was an Ohio State cornerback with elite speed and smooth coverage skills, and he came with no significant character concerns. He became a Pro Bowl corner and a team captain, standing out as one of the cleaner picks in this entire 10-year window. Between Ward and Mayfield, the Browns landed 2 foundational pieces in one night. When you add Garrett from the year before, it genuinely looked like Cleveland had finally figured out how to build a winner. But they didn't. Jedrick Wills came out of Alabama in 2020 as one of the cleaner draft picks and offensive linemen in that class. He'd protected 2 different quarterbacks, and he dominated SEC defensive ends for 3 seasons to prove he was a physically ready NFL caliber tackle. The one legitimate concern was positional because Wills had exclusively played right tackle at Alabama, which meant flipping to the left side was a required adjustment at the next level. For most prospects, that kind of transition is manageable with time and coaching, but for Wills, the move never quite clicked. His rookie year was solid enough to feel encouraged, but his second year was a clear step back. By 2023, he was playing poorly, and in 2024, he was barely getting on the field at all. The projection was reasonable at the time, but the development just never followed. He hasn't played a snap since 2024 either. Greg Newsome at 26 overall in 2021 is genuinely difficult to criticize. He was a Northwestern cornerback and a fluid athlete who processed the game at an elite level. He came in and did exactly what a late first-round corner is supposed to do by starting games and holding his own against good receivers. He was never a shutdown corner or a Pro Bowl alternate, and opposing offenses never felt the need to actively scheme around him. He was competent and replaceable, which isn't a disaster for pick 26, but it also isn't exactly what you need when you're trying to sustain a contending roster. That distinction matters matters more in context because by this point the Browns weren't just building anymore. They had Garrett, Ward, and Nick Chubb running behind a solid offensive line. They even had Baker Mayfield coming off one of the best seasons in 2020. The roster that existed after 2020 was genuinely good, and that's what makes everything that followed so hard to process. The Deshaun Watson trade happened in March of 2022. The Browns sent 3 first-round picks and much more to Houston for a quarterback who hadn't played a full season in over a year. This was all happening while he faced ongoing legal proceedings related to accusations from over 24 women. They then handed him a fully guaranteed 5-year, $230 million contract, which was the largest fully guaranteed deal in NFL history at the time. The rationale was that Watson was a transcendent talent worth the cost and that Baker Mayfield had a ceiling the front office didn't trust. That read on Baker aged badly almost immediately. Mayfield went on to the Rams, eventually then landing with Tampa Bay and took them to the playoffs on multiple seasons. He didn't fall off a cliff when he left Cleveland, but instead he kept playing winning football somewhere else. Deshaun has only played 19 games across 2 seasons in Cleveland. He tore his Achilles in 2024 and tore it again during rehab. The Browns still owe him $46 million per year through 2026, and the dead cap money is structured to carry all the way into 2030. The draft capital's gone, and the window that Garrett and Ward represented is effectively closed. All the while somehow Andrew Berry still has a job, which I don't understand, but that's a topic for another day. Mason Graham looked okay-ish, and the 2026 class just got drafted like 2 days ago, so I have nothing to say on them, but hopefully they'll be better in the future. 10 years of first-round picks led to a tiny 2-year window where the Browns actually got things right, but one massive gamble ended up tearing down everything they worked to build. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.